Bernie Sanders was recently unveiled some legislation. It is important. It's the Justice and Safety for All Act. Folks, I've read over this. I read over this for the better part of the day today on his website. It's available there. I want you to know it is comprehensive. It is. Bernie Sanders' criminal justice reform package is so thorough that there was no stone left unturned. I think the truest fighters for criminal justice will see it as for what it is. An authentic, realistic, fully detailed approach in reforming our criminal justice system. From the rooter to the tutor, from the bottom to the top. I hope that this piece of legislation, this act that he's introducing, I hope that those people, even my ADO's people, okay, that they will take the time to read it, to understand it, and recognize this is what we need to get behind. It is the most comprehensive, deep dive into reforming our broken system, or, depending on how you look at it, our well-tuned system that's heavily stacked against poor people, black people in particular, Latinos, Native Americans.
Thank you all very much for being here. And let me thank Senator Turner for the lovely introduction. And let me thank Donald Gilliard for his moving statement. Originally, I was going to come and give you a speech, but I'm getting bored by my own speeches. And I thought it would be more interesting and important that you had some people up here who knew about criminal justice from a legal perspective, who have experienced the criminal justice system. And later on, I want to open it up to everybody. So this is a discussion about an issue that of enormous consequence in this country, but does not get the kind of discussion that it deserves. So we have laid out what we think is perhaps the boldest criminal justice reform package in the history of United States politics. Some of you may agree with it all, some of you may agree with it some, and that's fine. Let's discuss it. And we're going to involve the panelists in that discussion. What I have learned in my political life is that what is most important is not having the answers, but having the questions. And sometimes you ask questions which may seem to some to be dumb bunny questions. Why are you asking such a dumb question? But people don't ask those fundamental questions which need to be discussed. As Senator Turner mentioned, let me just start it off, and I want you all to be thinking about it, and I want our panelists who have all experience in one way or another on this issue. Here's a question. You don't see it much on the TV. You don't read about it in the papers. It's a very simple question. We are the wealthiest country in the history of the world. That's a fact. Yet we have more people in jail and in the criminal justice system on probation and on parole, by far, ain't even close, than any other major country on earth. I want you to think about it. China is a country 4 times our size. It is a communist, authoritarian country that does not tolerate dissent particularly well. 4 times our size, we have more people in jail than China does. And the folks that we have in jail are disproportionately poor, disproportionately minority, African American, Latino, Native American. We spend, and I want everybody to hear this, $80 billion a year of taxpayers' money at the local, state, and federal level to lock up fellow Americans. $80 billion a year. And we end up with more people in jail than any other country on earth. So let me start off this discussion and lay it out to the panel, and I want all of you to be thinking about it. Might it not be a better idea to start taking some of that $80 billion spent to lock people up and maybe, just maybe, start investing in our young people, investing in good education for our kids, investing in job training for our kids so they don't end up in jail in the first place? And then I want to add to that the issue of what happens to people who serve time, do their time in jail. What happens when they get out of jail? Do they have the education? Do they have the income? Do they have the jobs? Do they have the housing that they need to get their feet on the ground so they don't fall into the same environment which got them into jail in the first place, or rather allows them to integrate themselves into civil society and become good citizens? Why do we have such a high rate of recidivism, people who leave jail and end up coming back into jail? So let me start with that question. We have more people in jail than any other country on earth. We're spending $80 billion a year. Can we invest that money in better ways than we currently do to keep people out of jail and to make sure that if they are in jail, when they come out, they don't go back into it? Who wants to start on it? Phil, introduce yourself and
Good
tell us
afternoon.
your experience and so forth.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. That's for y'all. Y'all, everybody. You all are everybody. My name is Philip Agnew. I'm a national surrogate for the Sanders campaign. And I come to this movement to elect Bernie Sanders from an organizing background. In 2012, after the murder of Trayvon Martin, I co-founded an organization in Florida called the Dream Defenders. And our work for the better part of 7 years has been to loosen the grip of prisons in the state of Florida. We are a state that until last year, 1.4 million people did not have the right to vote because they had a felony conviction in the state of Florida and were barred from ever being able to vote again. And last year, we were able to pass a ballot amendment to reverse that. And so we know, and that work was done under the leadership of formerly incarcerated people across the state of Florida. And so we were following their leadership. To your question, if you are a community organization or a community organizer, you know this. What is the number one way to stop youth violence? It's not a science to it. It's give young people something to do. You give them something to do. You give them jobs. You let them come into your home and play Fortnite all day. You give them something to do to occupy their time. And so why do we have more prisons and more people in prison than any other nation? Is because our economy creates mass inequality. And so what do you do with people who cannot get jobs, people who you have not trained? You house them. We are home in the state of Florida to the largest private prison company in the world, the GEO Group, right? This company is making billions and billions of dollars. That $80 billion that the senator is talking about doesn't just go anywhere. It goes into the pockets of private prison companies. And so when we say we want to end private prisons, we're talking about a massive disinvestment in a flourishing industry that has boomed in the last 30 years across this country, in South Carolina, across the South, and in Florida. And we're talking about putting that money into community services. It's not a science. Give people a job. Give them the opportunity to go to school, a quality school. Give them the opportunity to study a vocation or a trade. Give people the opportunity to travel and to move about and to become the people that we want them to become. And so it's not a science, right? It's not complex. When we're talking about moving this money that obviously is going to support a business that is heinous. I'm going to tell y'all one other thing. And I want you all to look at a Miami Herald story that came out last year. About a fight club that was organized in the private prisons in the state of Florida across the youth prisons. The state of Florida has 100% private prisons in its juvenile justice system. And they were paying kids to fight, right? And they were paying them with what? What were they giving them? Commissary, yeah? They were giving them honey buns. And so the lives of our children, right? The future creators of our lives were being put in the hands of a private prison industry that was causing them to fight each other over honey buns. And so this is a system this is a moral issue. It's an economic issue and it is a moral issue. And this is the most radical program that's been put forth, not by a presidential candidate this year. I'm talking about a presidential candidate in history. I urge you all to read this plan, because what we're talking about is a revolutionary act when we're talking about criminal justice.
Thank you, Phil. All right, let's stay on this issue for a moment, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of issues out there. This is maybe the most. Why do we have so many people in jail? And how do we cut back on the number of people who get arrested and end up in jail? Aaron, did you want to say a word on that? Or?
Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Green. I'm from Orangeburg, South Carolina, a graduate of the University of South Carolina twice, undergrad and law school. Glad to be here. I guess the reason I'm here, I work with the Right to Vote movement, which came out of the Jailhouse Lawyer Speaks, which is a prisoner-led movement. I work with Amani Suarez, who's the national spokesperson. We pretty much are led by those that are incarcerated. You know, we communicate with them through
Aaron,
mail.
hold that mic a little bit closer to your mouth.
We communicate with them via mail and other things of that sort, and we advocate with them on the outside. So when we talk about this issue, before I go into it, I think we have to talk about South Carolina. We have to talk about August 21st. August 21st is the one-year anniversary of the National Prison Strike. The National Prison Strike started in South Carolina after the Lee County Massacre. The Lee County Massacre, where 7 people were killed, 20 were injured. From what I understood, it went on for 8 hours. Prisoners were stacking bodies, begging the state to intervene. No one intervened. So people say 7 people died. I say 7 people bled to death. Similar to what we had in Attica. And out of that crisis, you had 10 demands. 34 states. You had prisoners from 34 states, and even it reached Palestine, pushing 10 demands. And I'm so glad to see that I'm looking at the demands now, and many of the demands are in Senator Sanders' bill proposal. So this is powerful, not only because it addresses the issues, but it is connecting to those that are incarcerated. These issues have not just started. They relate back to Attica. They relate back to the beginning. And we ask the question, why is this going on? I have to go back to South Carolina, the capital of slavery. One of the capitals of convict leasing. One of the capitals around the country in regards to one of the worst criminal justice systems. You're seeing the connection. The connection is to slavery. The 13th Amendment did not end slavery for everybody. The 13th Amendment, what does it say? It doesn't end slavery for those that are incarcerated. So when we're driving down the highway, we see people, SCDC, picking up trash for 5 cents an hour. That is slavery. When we go to our state house and we see people cutting the grass, that is slavery. And if we're going to change this system, we have to be committed to ending slavery. We have to be committed to breaking every chain.
I had an opportunity to read Senator Sanders' proposal on criminal justice reform, and it was just simply remarkable. And what I like, Senator, is that you are not afraid to take on issues with principles and morals, regardless of who think it's popular or not. The system is broken from the bottom up, total, everything. From when they get arrested, to call on the phone, your mother has to pay $5 to talk to you 2 minutes on the phone. Profit coming. You get a commissary, they get a candy bar, $3.80 for a 20-cent candy bar. Yes, it's true. Right now, you probably can go to Richland County Jail. They price gauging our families right now. So the cycle of what happens in prison is real. Please read this senator's platform on criminal justice reform. And I know all the candidates will be talking about it, but trust me, nobody understands it, and nobody is talking about the real substantive issues the way Senator Sanders is.
All right, guys, so what I want to do now, and I want to go through his plan. I want us to take some time tonight, right now, to go through his plan. I want us to be the most informed group of people on the internet about Bernie Sanders' plan for criminal justice reform. I want you to be armed with truth. Not sound bites, not an article from Vox or from CNN, a word here and there on MSNBC. I want us to take the time to go line from line together. I'll do my best to make it interesting. I'll make it real. But we got to do this because, I'll tell you really the reason why. And I don't mean anything about Bernie Sanders, but reading over legislation is probably not the funnest thing you could do on a Monday night. I was watching a clip of Bernie Sanders, a story that I covered, where they were saying how Bernie's Faiz, his campaign manager, I think it is, was saying that one of the problems that they have is that the media thinks Bernie's too boring because he's too predictable. He doesn't give them great sound bites, stuff like that. And because Bernie likes to focus on the issues. And I was thinking, I don't want to be seen that way. I don't want it to seem like we only focus on sound bites. And if he punches at Kamala, or if he takes down Joe Biden, or if he says something snippy, you know? Of course, we love spicy Bernie. But we got to love Bernie down in the details. We got to love Bernie's attention to detail in the approach to this legislation for all the right reasons. We need to take the time to do it. So I want to do that right now with you. All right? Let's go. Let's do it. You are special for sitting around, for staying for this. This means that you are much different than the average person. You're not just a person floating by, but you want to know. You want the information, so let me give it to you. Justice and safety for all. This is from the Bernie Sanders website. You can go there, and it's as bright as day on his website. Everything you'll see here is from his website, not a publication, not the Washington Post or some other publication. Justice and safety for all. Today we say to the prison industrial complex that we're going to bring about real criminal justice reform. We're going to end the international embarrassment of having more people in jail than any other country on earth. Instead of spending $80 billion a year on jails and incarceration, we're going to invest in jobs and education for our young people. No more private prisons and detention centers. No more profiteering from locking people up. No more war on drugs. No more keeping people in jail because they are too poor to afford cash bail. It goes on to say, for most of our history as a country, the U.S. incarcerated people at about the same rates as other Western democracies do today. In early 1970s, we had the same low crime rate as today, but we now have an incarceration rate 5 times higher. America is now the world's leading jailer. We lock up more than 2 million people in America, which is more of our own people than any country on earth. And that does not include 5 million people who are on supervision of the correctional system. Hundreds of thousands of incarcerated people in America have not been convicted of a crime and are solely in jail because they can't afford their bail. We are criminalizing poverty. When they talked about the amount, when we talked about the kids fighting over honey buns, do you think those are kids fighting over honey buns who have money that their parents can put money on their books? I don't think it is. I don't think kids would fight over honey buns if their parents had money to send them. So these are poor kids to begin with. That's part of it. Due to the historical legacy of institutional racism in the country, mass incarceration disproportionately falls on the shoulders of black and brown people in America. In fact, black Americans are incarcerated at 5 times the rate of white Americans, and even though people use drugs like marijuana at roughly the same rates across all races, black Americans are nearly 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than white Americans. These disparities pervade every aspect of the criminal justice system. Black Americans, and especially young black men, are more likely to be stopped by the police, subjected to excessive force, arrested, and jailed than whites. When Bernie is president, we will finally make the deep and structural investments to rebuild the communities that mass incarceration continues to decimate. We must move away from any overly punitive approach to public safety and start focusing on how to safeguard our communities, present the conditions that lead to arrest and prevent the conditions that lead to arrest and rehabilitate people who have made mistakes. Step one, we want to end profiteering in our criminal justice system. We must end the practice of corporations profiting off the suffering of incarcerated people and their families. The private prison industry is growing, and so are the horror stories. In Mississippi, the rate of violent assault in private prisons was 2 to 3 times that of publicly run facilities. At one facility, juveniles as young as 13 years old were common targets of sexual assault. No one should be able to profit from filling our jail and prisons. As has been reported, private prisons also act on their profit incentive by advocating for longer sentences for people convicted of a crime. Additionally, corporations and police departments rake in billions in fines and fees from disadvantaged communities. The prison phone industry, for example, is a monopoly business worth more than $1 billion a year, with companies charging sky-high fees for telephone calls that many families can't afford to pay to keep in touch with their loved ones. Today, 1 in 28 children has an incarcerated parent, a fifth of which are under 4 years old. Children with incarcerated parents tend to do worse in school, experience anxiety and depression, and develop behavioral issues. Corporations and cities alike rake in hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and fees off the backs of our most vulnerable communities, but it should not be this way. Everyday people are already struggling to get by should not be made to subsidize the criminal justice system. Right now, a person charged with an offense who cannot afford a lawyer is often charged a public defender fee and levied court cost, even if that person is not convicted of any crime. More than 40 states use driver's license suspension as a means of pressuring people to pay various court fees, which means people cannot drive to work to earn a living. The inability to pay fines and fees also can lead to people spending far more time incarcerated, effectively creating modern-day debtors' prisons. Fines and fees for people who cannot afford them are counterproductive, serve no legitimate government interest, and leave already vulnerable people even more vulnerable. And what I love about this is what Bernie does here very often. As we read this, you'll see, as president, Bernie will what? What will he do? Ban for-profit prisons. Make prison phone calls and other communications such as video chats free of charge. Audit the practices of commissaries and use regulatory authority to end price gouging and exorbitant fees. Incentivize states and localities to end police departments. Reliance on fines and fees for revenue. This is so true, guys. In some cities, small towns across this country, their only industry is the prison industry. Everybody work at the jail. No jail, they got no industry. Got to do something about that. But you don't get to exploit people because you don't have an industry. We need to create an industry that doesn't involve incarcerating poor people. We want to remove the profit motive from our reentry system and diversion, community supervision or treatment programs, and ensure people leaving incarceration or participating in diversion, community supervision, or treatment programs can do so free of charge. Here we go, guys. My bad. In cash bail. Right now, hundreds of thousands of people without a criminal conviction are in jail simply because they can't afford their bail. Young people can spend hundreds of days in jail only to be acquitted. Yet the severe damage to their lives cannot be undone. This is why Bernie introduced the No Money Bail Act of 2018 to end cash bail and to end the criminalization of poverty in America. Notice I said 2018, not 2019. As president, Bernie will end the use of secured bonds in federal criminal proceedings. provide grants to states to reduce their pretrial detention populations, which are particularly high at the county level, and require states to report on outcomes as a condition of renewing their funding. Withhold funding from states to continue the use of cash bail systems, ensure the alternatives to cash bail are not leading to disparities in the system. We want to transform the way we police our communities. The people who serve our county or our country as police officers deserve our gratitude and respect. Debatable in its current form. As a country, though, we're asking them to do far too much. As human beings, we should all share common vulnerabilities, and we all share basic needs to live a stable and dignified life. In America, we have not made the necessary investments to secure a strong enough social fabric to ensure that people's basic needs are met. So in lieu of addressing problems directly, we ask police officers to address every societal issue that results from the tears or the tears in the fabric, whether it be mental illness, addiction, homelessness, or poverty. We ask overstressed police officers to fill roles that are not trained or equipped for, doubling as social workers, conflict negotiators, and medical responders. Last year, more police officers died of suicide than in the line of duty. We need to shift our emphasis towards solving problems in ways that don't rely on policing and incarceration as a first option by supporting alternative strategies to make individuals and communities safer and healthier. In other ways, we must hold our police and sheriff's departments to a higher standard. We must end harmful policing practices like racial profiling, stop and frisk, oppressive broken windows, policing, and the militarization of police forces, all of which actively undermine public safety and community. Widespread use of excessive force, including deadly shootings of unarmed civilians, undermine the integrity of and the public trust in the police. Violence and brutality of any kind, particularly at the hands of the police meant to protect and serve our communities, must not be tolerated. Hang in there, y'all. Y'all doing good. We want to ensure law enforcement accountability and robust oversight. Rescind former Attorney General Jeff Sessions' guidance on consent decrees. Revitalize the use of Department of Justice investigations, consent decrees, federal lawsuits to address systemic constitutional violations by police departments. Ensure accountability, strict guidelines, independent oversight for all federal funds used by police departments. End federal programs that provide military equipment to local police officers. Create a federally managed database of police use of deadly force. That's right, a federally managed database of police use of deadly force. Provide grants for states and cities to establish civilian oversight with enforceable, accountability mechanisms. Establish federal standards for the use of body cameras, including establishing third-party agencies to oversee the storage and release of police videos. Mandate criminal liability for civil rights violations resulting from police misconduct. Limit the use of qualified immunity to address the lack of criminal liability for civil rights violations resulting from police misconduct. Conduct the U.S. Attorney General's investigation whenever someone is killed in police custody. We ain't done. Establish a federal no-call policy, including a registry of disreputable federal law enforcement officers, so testimony from untrustworthy sources does not lead to criminal convictions. Provide financial support to pilot local and state level no-call lists. Ban the use of face recognition software for policing. Have y'all seen how crazy it's getting with this face recognition software? All right. Provide more support to police officers and create a robust non-law enforcement alternative response system. This is something I talked about with former police officer Michael Wood of the Baltimore Police Department. If you've been following me that long, you'll know I had Michael Wood on the show, and we talked about how cops had to do too much. Too much. not trained for it, asking too much. Everything from getting a kitten out of a tree to a call of abuse for spousal abuse, or an altercation, domestic altercation, to a bank robbery, to you just never know. And it creates a situation. Let me go on. Let me show you. So what we want to do is break down some of the, let's relieve or remove some of these responsibilities by establishing national standards for use of force by police to emphasize de-escalation. You would think we already would have that, but we don't. Require and fund police officer training on implicit bias to include biases based on race, gender, sex orientation, identity, religion, ethnicity, and class. Cultural competency, de-escalation, crisis intervention, adolescent development, and how to interact with people with mental and physical disabilities. We will ensure that training is conducted in a meaningful way with strict independent oversight and enforceable guidelines. Ban the practice of any law enforcement agency benefiting from civil asset forfeiture. Limit or eliminate federal criminal justice funding for any state or locality that does not comply. Provide funding to states and municipalities to create civilian corps of unarmed first responders such as social workers, EMIs, trained mental health professionals. Most of the shootings are people with mental health disorders and police are not trained to deal with. Stop sending cops to deal with people with mental health checkups. So damn basic. Who can handle order, maintenance, violations, mental health emergencies, and low-level conflicts outside the criminal justice system, freeing officers to concentrate on more serious crimes. Incentivize access to counseling and mental health services, not just for the public, but for the officers. Diversify police forces and academies and incentivize officers to live and work in the communities they serve. Hang in there, y'all. We want to ensure all Americans get due process. The criminal justice system is rigged. The U.S. has a criminal justice system that's built to put the profit interest of billion-dollar industries like the bail bondsman over the interests of everyday working people. It's time to tell the bail industry and the private prison industry and the private probation industry and anyone who profits from incarceration that we are going to put the well-being of the people first. But that's not enough. The size of your bank account too often determines the quality of representation that a person will receive. If you can't afford to pay fines and fees associated with criminal justice involvement, you can end up in a spiraling cycle of debt with a suspended driver's license or even locked up in a modern debtor's prison. Folks, we need a system that works equally well for workers and the wealthy. You need a right to counsel. In 1963, the Supreme Court decided Gideon versus Wainwright, guaranteeing all felony defendants counsel. Yet today, 90 to 95% of criminal cases are decided by a plea deal, too often without the defendant playing an active role. Across the U.S., more than 80% of felony defendants cannot afford a privately retained lawyer and have to rely on state-administered public defenders or court-appointed counsel. Yet in states across the country, public defenders have far too many clients and too few resources to offer adequate representation. Despite the often heroic efforts of public defenders and other appointed counsel, the workload makes it impossible to provide the quality of representation that each defendant deserves. 77% of Black Americans, 73% of Latinos in state prisons had a public defender, a court-appointed counsel. Yet 75% of county-based public defender offices have exceeded the maximum recommended limit of cases received per attorney. America must not be a country where only the rich enjoy the protections of the Fifth Amendment. We must not have a court system that offers the best justice money can buy. We must guarantee that all Americans get their Sixth Amendment rights. Let's keep going, y'all. So what will Bernie do if he's president? Triple congressional spending on indigenous defense to $14 billion annually. After review of current salaries and workloads, set a minimum starting salary for public defenders. Create and set a national formula to assure populations have a minimum number of public defenders to assure full access to constitutional rights to due process. Establish federal guidelines and goals for a right to counsel, including policies that reduce the number of cases overall. Create a federal agency to provide support and oversight for state public defense services. Authorize the Department of Justice to take legal action against jurisdictions that are not meeting their Sixth Amendment obligations. Cancel all existing student debt and cancel any future student debt for public defenders throughout the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. That's right. Give people an incentive to be public defenders. Ensure accountability and fairness in prosecution. Prosecutors today have undue discretion deciding which cases will be charged, and they are largely protected from liability when they break the rules. They also have an advantage to plea bargain cases. People in jail without financial sources are more likely to plead guilty, then fight the case, and they are more likely to receive harsher penalties than those who aren't detained. The vast majority of cases, 97% of federal cases, 94% of states' cases, end in plea agreements. We need to make sure that our system is fair and prosecutors are accountable. It's ridiculous, man. Woo. All right. As president, what will Bernie do about this? Rescind former Attorney General Justice. Okay, no, this is new. Rescind former Attorney General Jeff Sessions' orders on prosecutorial discretion in low-level offenses. Appoint an Attorney General committed to public safety and creating a more just and humane criminal justice system. Limit absolute immunity for prosecutors, which is used to shield wrongdoers from liability. In the practice of jailing material witnesses. Place a moratorium on the use of the algorithmic risk assessment tools in the criminal justice system until an audit is completed. Wow, I need some water, guys. We must ensure these tools do not have any implicit biases that lead to unjust or excessive sentences. Ending mass incarceration and excessive sentencing. Today, in the United States imprisons people at a higher rate than any other nation, in no small part due to extremely harsh sentencing policies and the war on drugs. But mass incarceration has not made us any safer or reduced drug use and addiction. On the contrary, it's cost lives, diverted resources that could be used to prevent crime through social investment. We must end the war on drugs that has disproportionately affected black and brown people. The U.S. ranks highest in incarceration among organizations for economic cooperation and development countries. Twice as much as Turkey, which has the second highest rate of incarceration. Capital punishment has failed to reduce violent crime and is disproportionately apportioned to the poor and black and brown people. It has also cost innocent lives. According to the Equal Justice Initiative, for every 9 people executed in this country since the reinstatement of the capital punishment, 1 innocent person on death row has been identified and exonerated. That's a horrific figure if you got any soul in you at all. Any soul in you. As President, Bernie will abolish the death penalty. I tell people all the time, it does not mean that you agree or that you think that people should not be punished for taking life. You have to understand our system is so out of balance. It is so disproportionately unfair to poor and black and brown people that it is not meting out the death penalty in a fair and just way. Reverse the Trump administration's guidance on the use of death penalty drugs with the goal of ending death penalty at the state level. Stop excessive sentencing with the goal of cutting the incarcerated population in half. They don't want prisoners out, they want prisoners in. It makes money. Stop excessive sentencing, that we did that, Tim, end mandatory sentencing minimums. Reinstate a federal parole system and end truth in sentencing. People serving long sentences will undergo a second look process to make sure their sentence is still appropriate. Don't you think it's time we end the 3-strike laws? No one should spend their life behind bars for committing minor crimes, even if they committed several of them. Invigorate and expand a compassionate release process. My bad. Where were we at? Where are we at here? Invigorate and explain. Invigorate and expand the compassionate release process so that people with disabilities and the sick and elderly are transitioned out of incarceration whenever possible. Expand the use of sentencing alternatives, including community supervision and publicity-funded halfway houses. This includes funding state-based pilot programs to establish alternatives to incarceration, including models based on restorative justice and free access to treatment and social services. Revitalize the executive clemency process by creating an independent clemency board removed from the Department of Justice and placed in the White House. Stop the criminalization of homelessness and spend more than $25 billion over 5 years to end homelessness. Wow. This includes doubling McKinney-Vento homelessness assistance grants to build permanent supportive housing, and $50 million to provide outreach to homeless people to help connect them to available services in the first year of this plan. 25,000 Housing Trust Fund units will be prioritized by housing the homeless. Anyone who doesn't know how important that is, wow, it's amazing. Let's keep going, guys. Let's try. Let's tough it out. End the war on drugs and stop criminalizing addiction. The disastrous policies that make up the war on drugs have not reduced drug use and violent crime. We must use effective therapeutic, non-punitive solutions to address drug addiction. What will Bernie do if he's president? He'll legalize marijuana and vacate and expunge past marijuana convictions, ensure that revenue from legal marijuana is reinvested in communities hit hardest by the war on drugs. Can I say that again? Legalize marijuana and vacate and expunge past marijuana convictions and ensure that revenue from legal marijuana is reinvested in communities hit hardest by the war on drugs. Provide people struggling with addiction with the health care they need by guaranteeing health care, including inpatient and outpatient and substance abuse and mental health services with no co-payments or deductibles. This is for all people as a right, not a privilege, through a Medicare for All single-payer program. Decriminalize possession of buprenorphine, which helps to treat opiate addiction, and ensure that first responders carry naloxone to prevent overdoses. Legalize safe injection sites and needle exchanges around the country. Support pilot programs to supervise injection sites, which have shown to substantially reduce drug overdose death. Raise the threshold for when drug charges are federalized, as federal charges carry longer sentences. We want to work with the states to fund and pursue innovative overdose prevention initiatives. Institute a full review of the current sentencing guidelines and end the sentencing disparity between crack and cocaine. You want to treat children like children. In the school to prison pipeline, black students, even in preschool, are nearly 4 times as likely to be suspended as white kids, putting them at a greater risk of falling behind and getting caught up in the juvenile system. Black and brown students and students with disabilities are more likely to be subjected to exclusionary discipline measures than their peers. When a child is pushed out of school, they lose instructional time and are more likely to become involved with the juvenile and adult justice systems. So we know what the problems are. It's just that we don't take steps to correct them. Next. What will Bernie do? Ban the prosecution of children under the age of 18 in adult court. Work to ensure that all juvenile facilities are designed for rehabilitation and growth. Ensure youth are not jailed or imprisoned for misdemeanor offenses. Ensure juveniles will not house in adult prisons in solitary confinement for youth. Abolish long mandatory minimum sentences and life without parole sentences for youth. Eliminate criminal charges for school-based disciplinary behavior that would not otherwise be criminal. Invest in schools, nurses, counselors, teachers assistants, small class sizes to address disciplinary issues. You want to ensure that every school has the necessary school counselors and wraparound services by providing $5 billion annually to expand the sustainable community school model. End the use of juvenile fees. Decriminalize truancy for all youth and their parents. Hey, Kamala. Eliminate federal incentives for schools to implement zero-tolerance policies. Invest in local youth diversion programs as alternatives to the court and prison system. Work with teachers, school administrators, and the disability rights movement to end restraint and seclusion discipline in school. Man, you guys are amazing. Thank you for being there. Thank you for caring about this. Reform our decrepit prison system to make jails and prisons more humane. Incarceration should always be a last resort, but when it's necessary, the condition of confinement should be safe, humane, designed for rehabilitation, yet too often, jails are violent, deeply destabilizing places. They not only fail to prepare people to reintegrate into society, they affirmatively make people more traumatized, sick, and vulnerable. America's prisons are hotbeds of human rights violations, torture, sexual assault, and wrongful imprisonment. Prisoners are being crammed in overcrowded cells and made to live in unsanitary conditions. They're not getting the medical attention they need and are being forced to work as modern day, I would use slaves instead of indentured servants here. But I guess you have to use indentured service because they are getting some form of pay. Right? Still slavery to me. Corporations raking profits. We must put an end to this barbarism and respect the rights of all human beings and treat them with basic dignity. As president, Bernie will enact a prison bill of rights that guarantees ending solitary confinement. Solitary confinement is a form of torture. It's unconstitutional, plain and simple. Access to free medical care in prisons and jails, including professional and evidence-based substance abuse, trauma-informed mental health treatment. Incarcerated trans people have access to all health care they need, access to free educational and vocational training, including the ban on Pell Grants for all ending the ban on Pell Grants for all incarcerated people without any exceptions. living wages and safe working conditions, including maximum work hours for all incarcerated people for their labor. If they had to pay prisoners a decent wage, there would be less prisoners. The right to vote. All voting age Americans must have the right and meaningful access to vote, whether they're incarcerated or not. Stop looking at everyone incarcerated as if they killed someone. Most people in jail are not in there for violent crime. This is a boogeyman tactic they use to help you go along with them, taking away rights from people who are poor. We will re-enfranchise the right to vote to the millions of Americans who have had their vote taken away by a felony conviction. Ending prison gerrymandering, ensuring incarcerated people are counted in their communities, not where they are incarcerated. Establishment of an Office of Prisoner, Civil Rights and Civil Liberties within the Department of Justice to investigate civil rights complaints from incarcerated individuals and provide independent oversight to make sure that prisoners are housed in safe, healthy environments. Protection from sexual abuse and harassment, including mandatory federal prosecution of prison staff who engage in such misconduct. Access to their families, including unlimited visits, phone calls, and video calls. A determination for the most appropriate setting for people with disabilities and safe, accessible conditions for people with disabilities in prisons and jails. Basically, treat people like people. Crazy idea. Ensure a just transition post-release. I told you this was comprehensive. It wasn't, hey, we're just going to get out, we're going to let a couple people out and call it criminal justice before. We're going to have a couple people get out. Oh, you want justice reform? I thought you wanted justice reform, y'all. Here you go. Ensure a transition post-release. Not just a transition, a just transition. 750,000 people will return home from prison and millions more from jail. Most of them will face enormous barriers that make successful reentry nearly impossible. We must put an end to employment discrimination and eliminate barriers to training and education. Once someone has served their time, they should not be excluded from social programs, including public housing, medical care, and the right to vote and serve on juries. What will you do, Bernie? Make expungement broadly available. Remove legal and regulatory barriers. Facilitate access to services so that people returning home from jail or prison can build a stable and productive life. Going back to crime is a much harder choice to make when you got options. So you create a federal agency responsible for monitoring reentry. Ban the box by removing questions regarding convictions. Enact fair chance licensing reform to remove unfair restrictions on occupational licensure based on criminal history. Increase funding for reentering youth programs. We also passed a massive youth jobs program to provide jobs and job training opportunities for disadvantaged young Americans who face high unemployment rates. We want to guarantee safe, decent, affordable housing. Remove the profit motive from our reentry system and diversion, community supervision, or treatment programs, and ensure people leaving incarceration or participating in diversion, community supervision, or treatment programs can do so free of charge. Guarantee jobs and free job training at trade schools, and apprenticeship programs. Actually give a damn. How about that? We want to end the cycle of violence and provide support to survivors of crime. America has a crisis of both too much punishment and too little accountability. Despite popular assumptions that victims of crime only support long sentences and prison expansion, a national survey of crime survivors revealed that what people harmed by crimes want most is to ensure that they are not harmed again and that no one else will be harmed either. By a significant margin, crime survivors prefer fairer prison sentences, greater investments in crime prevention, rehabilitation, schools and education, and mental health and drug treatment. We're talking about crime survivors, what they want, not what prisons, private prison lobbyists want, but what the people want. Once your anger's gone away, you want to be part of the solution, not a lynch party. At least most people. Crime survivors also want the support they need and deserve to get back on their feet, like trauma recovery services to help stop cycles of violence and crime. Roughly half of all sexual assault victims lose their jobs or are forced to quit their jobs. We're talking about their victims. We're not even taking care of victims. In the U.S., about 2/3 of those injured from intimate partner violence, predominantly women, do not receive medical care. Of all domestic violence victims who need housing, more than half do not receive this help, and about 40% of them become homeless at some point in their lives. They had a trauma that's never treated. It affects their whole life. And then it affects their children, if they have them. To provide justice and support to crime survivors and to interrupt the cycle of violence so that there are fewer crime victims in the future. This requires a realignment of policing priorities and deep investments to get survivors the support that they need. Home stretch, guys, home stretch. You're doing amazing. You are doing amazing. When Bernie's in the White House, what will he do? He will stop the cycle of violence by prioritizing the most serious offenses, focus law enforcement resources to dramatically increase the solve rate of the most serious offenses, such as shootings, homicides, and sexual assaults. Fund cure violence and similar proven effective violence interruption models to stop violent incidents before they begin. Fund programs for people who are at serious risk of being either the perpetrator or victim of gun violence. Provide non-law enforcement-led services, including job training and placement assistance, education, and help covering basic needs such as housing, food, and transportation. People feel like they got no hope. Makes them more prone to crime. People who live around people who have no hope makes them more prone to become victims. Provide funding to end the national rape kit backlog, and institute new rules requiring the rape kits be tested and the victims are provided with updates on the status of their rape kits. Address gender-based violence on college campuses by reversing Educational Secretary Betsy DeVos' decision to weaken Title, VI? We will protect and enforce Title VI. Was that 11? I don't remember. That's 11. Provide adequate support to crime survivors, prevent and address sex trafficking with safe harbor. These policies, they treat trafficked individuals or persons involved in illegal activities such as prostitution as victims rather than criminals, and that offer legal and financial support for victims. You'll never meet a rich prostitute. Funding sex trafficking research and prevention programs that include early identification of vulnerable populations like foster children and youth in transition, as well as Native American women. Immediately reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. Provide housing assistance and paid leave for victims of sexual assault. Expand non-police interventions for domestic violence, including a national help hotline and state-funded long-term counseling. Everything shouldn't be lock people up. Everything is lock people up. And that's all we do is lock people up. Reverse the criminalization of disability. According to the Department of Justice, 1 in 5 inmates in prisons are people with a cognitive disability, while another 1 in 5 inmates have serious mental illnesses. Instead of incarceration, we should be providing people with disabilities with services and supports they need to stay in the community, including mental health care and home and community-based services. Not only is it the right thing to do, but it costs significantly less to provide someone with the necessary supports and services to stay in their communities than it does to incarcerate them. It's dumb. Jails are dumb. Reverse criminalization. All too often, people with disabilities, especially people of color with disabilities, face violence from law enforcement. This requires more than just training. It requires accountability. Approximately half of all people who die in police-involved shootings have a disability. In order to protect the rights of people with disabilities, we intend to make discriminatory law enforcement interactions with people with disabilities a major enforcement priority of the Civil Rights Division. Recognizing the humanitarian crisis in our country created by the incarceration of people with mental illness, we will use the Supreme Court's Olmstead decision to challenge states that have failed to adequately support the voluntary community-based mental health services that can divert people with mental health illness from ending up in the criminal justice system. Bar criminal charges for school-based behavior that would not otherwise be criminal, and invest in nurses, counselors, teachers' assistants. And we did this, didn't we? We will ensure every school has the necessary school counselors, wraparound services. I feel like we did this one. Yeah. Diversion programs. Yeah. Guarantee mental health care to people with disabilities as a human right, including all supports. Services needed to stay in the community. Mental health care under Medicare for All will be free at the point of service with no copayments or deductibles, which can be a barrier to treatment. The plan will also provide home and community-based long-term services and supports to all and cover prescription drugs. We want to train and recruit and increase the number of mental health providers to provide culturally competent care in underserved communities. Guarantee that people with disabilities have safe, accessible, and integrated affordable housing. People with disabilities deserve jobs that pay a living wage. It's time to end the sub-minimum wage and guarantee truly integrated employment opportunities for people with disabilities. Triple Title I funding. Expand the idea and make other major investments in public K-12 education is outlined in the Thurgood Marshall Plan for public education and educators. Crucially, the plan will provide mandatory funding to ensure that the federal government provides at least 50% of the funding for IDEA. And guarantee children, that's right, and guarantee children with disabilities an equal right to high-quality education. That's right. Next. Guarantee debt and debt-free public colleges, university trade schools, apprenticeship programs, and to end the equity gap in higher education attainment for people with disabilities by ensuring all our students get the help they need so they'll be ready for college and receive the support they need when they are in college. We don't talk about that a lot. People need support in college. Increase educational opportunities for parents or persons with disabilities, including the expansion in career and technical education opportunities to prepare students for good paying community employment. So we got to invest in our communities. Today we spend billions of dollars on jails and prisons, including $38 million a day, detaining people awaiting trial. Too often, we don't make the investments while neglecting the upfront services and infrastructure that communities need to thrive. We know that a lack of quality education deficiencies in our education system can play a major role in mass incarceration. For example, places like South Carolina, we spend twice as much on incarcerating people than we do on educating them. We spend twice as much to lock people up than educate them, and then we say, these people don't want to be free. These people don't want a life. Why do they commit so much crime? We spend twice as much money. We make it so much easier to go to jail than we do for them to go to college. We also know that we have a racial economic disparity within the broader economic disparity in America. Black Americans currently have 10 cents for every dollar white Americans have. Latinx Americans currently have 13 cents for every dollar white Americans have. Redlining prevents businesses owned by people of color from getting loans, and predatory lending results in higher interest rates in low-income communities of color. Prison is not a solution for social problems. It just creates more problems. We need to address the deeper structural problems that give rise to crimes such as joblessness, income inequality, lack of education, and untreated substance abuse. What will Bernie do? What you gonna do, Bernie? How about an act of federal jobs guarantee to provide good jobs at a living wage, revitalizing and taking care of the community? Pass the $15 minimum wage. Guarantee mental health care to people with disabilities as a human right, including all support and services needed to stay in the community. Mental health care under Medicare for All will be free at the point of service with no co-payments or deductibles, which can be a barrier to treatment. As we stated, people struggling with addiction to health care, they get the health care they need by guaranteeing health care, which includes inpatient and outpatient substance abuse, mental health services, and no co-payments or deductibles to people as a right, not a privilege, through Medicare for All single-payer program. You know, the one commoners doesn't feel good about anymore. Provide transportation benefits to and from health services for those who need it. Can't get there, don't have a ride? We got you. We will invest in our healthcare workforce and provide and its infrastructure to ensure that all communities have access to the services. We want to enact paid family leave so people can take time off from work to help themselves or a family member as they go through their treatment. We want to ensure that people who interacted with the justice system are still able to get rehabilitation services, the services they need to be able to find housing and employment. Triple Title I funding expands the idea, invest in after-school programs, and make other major investments in K-12. As stated before, end the exploitative practices of payday lenders and ensure all Americans have access to basic financial services through the post office. You want to put a cap on interest rates on consumer loans and credit cards at 15% across all financial institutions. States will be empowered to cap rates even lower than 15%. The Department of Transportation funding to integration and improving commuting in urban centers and restore the Tiger program to focus on public transportation. You don't know how hard it is for some people to even be able to get to a job. Don't know it till it's you. Create $10 billion grant program with the Minority Business Development Agency to provide grants to entrepreneurs of color. Pass the Water Act to create $35 billion annual fund to remove and replace lead pipes in communities throughout the country. Flint, ensure federal resources are focused on the Americans who need it most, often a result of structural disadvantage. We will implement the 10-20-30 approach to federal investments, which focuses substantial federal resources on distressed communities that have high levels of poverty. We're spending $80 billion a year to lock up 2.2 million people, hundreds of thousands of whom have not been convicted of a crime and are solely in jail because they can't afford their bail. We are criminalizing poverty, and because of this historical legacy of racism in this country, we are disproportionately criminalizing African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans. With increased detention of immigrants under the Trump administration, private prisons are becoming more widespread and more profitable. We need real comprehensive criminal justice reform now. We must end once and for all the destructive war on drugs, legalize marijuana, eliminate private prisons and detention centers, end cash bail, abolish the death penalty, end all mandatory minimums and reinstate the federal system of parole, seriously reform civil asset forfeiture, bring about major police department reform, and prevent employers from discriminating against applicants based on criminal history by banning a box. That was long, and I'm so glad it was long. I'm so glad it was comprehensive. I'm so glad it was a deep dive, and I want anyone out there who's still watching this video to think very hard about what's being proposed here. It is actual criminal justice reform because it wraps around and looks at everything from what makes a person resort to crime through a person being released out of the system and what keeps them from coming back to that type of life. How we can prevent it, how we can give support, how we can help while, how we can restore rights while, take away the incentives for jailing people. It's phenomenal, guys. This is amazing. I know that people are very skeptical of Bernie Sanders, and I see it all the time. I don't truly believe that every person I see who's so critical of Bernie Sanders knows about really what he's offering or what his plans are. Not what he's offering, like, here you go, but what the plans are if he is to become president. I don't see this type of comprehensive plan from any other candidate. Oh, but, I think that there are people who need to. I'm doing this so people can get a deeper dive. If you are an honest actor, and you are seriously looking at this election, and you're saying, what's in it for the black community? It's not just the black community. It's what's in it for Americans. You understand what I'm saying? Because it disproportionately affects black people, but it's not just for black people. It's not just for Latinos. It's not just for Native Americans. But this disproportionately impacts them. I think this is a comprehensive step in the right direction on so many levels. It's ridiculous. I think that people need to consider it and take the time to go through it. I just went through it with you because I think it's important that we get out of the sound bites, that we actually know what we're talking about. So now when you talk to others about Bernie Sanders' Justice and Safety Act, you'll know exactly what you're talking about. You'll be able to talk about the wraparound services. You'll be able to talk about ban the box so that people who have served their time can now get a job. People can get housing. You come out of jail, you can't get housing, you can't get food stamps, you can't get a job. What can you get? A gun. The gouging the parents when you're in jail. $5 for a phone call. $3 for a 50-cent candy bar. They're robbing us. What is it, 94% of people taking plea deals, not even fighting at all. They can't afford lawyers. Bernie Sanders, thank you so much for this legislation. Thank you for your team, whoever. I know that something like this is not done alone. Nothing big, nothing great gets done alone. I appreciate you giving us the tools to start the conversations in a way that cannot be marginalized and excused and brushed aside and boiled down to, where my check? Because it's bigger than that. This is bigger than that. This is about life in these communities, life in communities all across this country. At least if you disagree with it, you will be able to say, now, Tim Black, I see why you like Bernie. Now, Tim Black, I see why you think his policy is good. Now, Tim Black, I see that he is putting thought into this. He knows this legislation. Ask Kamala Harris, what's her criminal justice plan? Ask Mayor Pete Buttigieg, is his criminal justice plan an hour for just to read it? Does it include everything from the children, the babies, from the stop in the prison, the pipeline to prison, to when people come home? Giving them something to come back to and a new start? Does his plan address all of that? I don't think it does. Cory Booker, you're supposed to be active on criminal justice. Is your plan this comprehensive? I think we know the answers to these questions. So I want to thank the Bernie Sanders campaign, Bernie 2020, all the folks who are part of this, because you have equipped us. Now what we got to do, folks, is we got to take this information and we got to go out and share it with the world. I'm tired of people saying Bernie don't get it, Bernie don't understand. It's in writing, bro. It's in writing. You like Hillary for what? She didn't have a plan like this. She just didn't. Bernie wants to demolish the system. I don't hear Joe Biden talking about demolishing anything. What's Joe Biden's comprehensive plan to end private prisons? Take kids, babies out of solitary confinement, man. What's his plan? I'll be happy to listen to you tell me Joe Biden's point-by-point plan for getting rid of private prisons. See, I don't think he fundamentally wants to change anything. I think he's a Wall Street darling who has always been a Wall Street darling, and that's what he will continue to be. But sure, go ahead and tell me how electable he is. What good is electing Joe Biden if we still live in hell? What good is electing someone who's not going to make our lives any better? How can you defeat Trump if you're not offering people anything other than he's not racist? Well, I'm not sure about that. Anyway. All right. I'm Real Tim Black on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Tim Black at Night on Instagram. I'm the Wolfpack. Tim Black's Wolfpack is right behind me. Become a member, $5 a month. I love you. Remember, don't let nobody take your cornbread. Keep your cornbread. Also, sprinkle some facts on them. This is a lot of facts you got to sprinkle, guys. So get to sprinkling.